Hey, and welcome back to I Don't Want No Huns. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a part-time anti-MLM YouTube commentator, parodyist, and comedian. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than my normal videos. I am not going to be talking about a multi-level marketing company or racism or anything of that sort. I am going to be talking about, however, a very massive scam that many of us have endured in our lifetime, and that is a scam known as student loan debt. I started talking about this briefly on my stories on Instagram, and I thought, you know what, with the platform I have now, I'm going to do a video where I kind of break everything down, talk about my experience, and talk about why I think our generation, millennials in particular, were scammed into believing that we needed to spend this money, we needed to have this debt, and how we are nowhere near seeing the end for us, and how we are going to never see a boost in the economy unless something is done about it. So what I wanted to talk to you about briefly is we're going to look at the different average salaries of a couple of professions, mine being a teacher, the average salary in America. And then we're going to look at what the current student loan debt is in America, what the average monthly payment is in America, and then look at my personal story so you can just kind of see a real life example of somebody who has been affected by this. So the first thing we're going to look at is the average cost of tuition in a public and private university and compare the two. And they vary from state to state, and those numbers vary if you live in state or if you're going to school out of state. So the first four are the ones that came up, and they're the ones that we're going to look at first. So Oklahoma, across that 4 years, public college education would only cost $7,866. That's amazing. But a private school would put you in debt for across 4 years, $27,694. Then you get to Oregon, public 4 year is $10,286. Private 4 year is $40,597. Pennsylvania, public 4 year, $14,812. Private 4 year, $41,703. Rhode Island, $12,576. Private, $42,108. Now, let's see if we can look at the most expensive. Let me see if I can find what the most expensive one is. It looks like Vermont average is $44,000 and that's for in-state private. Okay, so the numbers are a lot, but to consider that you might be paying that much money, and that's just the average. Okay, this is not to say that other school that's across the board. And I'm going to get to my specific situation and what I experienced in general. The current total federal student loan debt. Okay, I'm going to read this directly from the government website that I pulled it from. Why can't I think of what it is? .gov. Federal student loan debt. Most student loans, about 92%, according to a July 2021 report by Measure One, an academic data firm, are owned by the U.S. Department of Education. Total federal student loan borrowers, 43.4 million. There are 43.4 million people who have borrowed federal student loans. Total outstanding federal student loan debt, $1.61 trillion. Total private student loan debt. Private student loans make up 7.89% of the total outstanding U.S. student loans, according to Measure One. Total outstanding private student loan debt, $136.31 billion. And then there's also Parent Plus loan debt, when the parents take out loans for their students. Total Parent Plus debt, $103.6 billion. And total Parent Plus borrowers, 3.6 million borrowers. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of debt that people are in. Now, before a lot of you might say, well, then don't get a college education. Don't spend the money if you don't have it. Well, we're going to get into that. Now, let's really quickly look at the average American salary. The average American salary sits in and around $51,000 a year. So if I graduate college with $41,000 in student loan debt, and I can only get a job at $51,000 a year, that's really not going to be great in paying off that debt. The average teacher salary, and I'm going to go with teacher because that's what I am, in Pennsylvania is $46,000 to $78,000. But that usually is the range because teachers do, especially teachers in a union, they have a scale that every year they are able to go up and based on their years of service, et cetera, et cetera. The average student loan debt, the average loan monthly payment is estimated at $460 a month. And that is the average. I can tell you that I know plenty of people where their payment is very much higher. And the annual student loan debt, again, in America is $1.6 trillion. Not million, not billion, it is trillion dollars. So what I'd like to bring up here is there is this great resource called the Family Budget Calculator. Let's take a look at what the monthly costs for a specific area that you might live in would be. And I'm just going to throw out, let's say, upstate New York. So let's just pick a random area. Albany, Schenectady, Detroit, metro area, perfect. 2 adults, 2 children. You would need to have an income of at least $101,855. And that is not taking into account your monthly total of what you are going to spend, your student loan payment. Okay? Let's do another area. Let's do Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. And this is one of the lower ends. So in Allegheny County, based on average prices, you would need to have $79,000. So about $80,000 is what your family needs to bring in. Let's do somewhere in California. I don't even want to know. Let's see, Fresno. That's actually not bad. That's better. Maybe I should move to Fresno. Let's try Oakmont. You need to have at least an income of $123,000 annually. So $10,000. And that's not taking into account any of these things. Other necessities, that's probably exceptionally low. Okay. So we see that happening. We see that our income and the things that we budget for, a lot of these budget calculators do not take into account your student loan debt. Okay. So now, let's also talk about people who are living on an hourly wage. So I do have a document here. This is from the government. I really should have written down where I got this. I typed in the poverty line and it was the government website that brought it up. I really should have copied that down. But let's just take a look at it. The poverty line is laughable. It is truly laughable to think that that's what qualifies as the poverty line and that it's not much higher. So if you are 2 people or 4 people, right? 4 people with 2 children, 4 children, whatever, you're looking at, you need to make more than $26,000 to not be below the poverty line. And that's before taxes. So nobody can live off of this. Before taxes, this is going to be less than $1,000 a month. But, if we look at this calculator, in these areas, you need $10,000 a month to just survive. And $896 for food, I'm sorry, that's not realistic. That's just not realistic in any world. That's not realistic. So the reason I'm bringing up all these numbers is to kind of put into perspective, okay, what these numbers look like and what people are living with. Let's also take a look at a salary calculator because in the United States, $7.25 is still the minimum wage. It's unbelievable to me. Now, some states have their own different minimum wage. Pennsylvania, we're still super terrible, and $7.25 is still our minimum wage. If you worked 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, so guaranteed 2 days off, and took 10 holidays per year and 15 days vacation, you would only make adjusted $13,630. So what if you double that? What if you work 80 hours. I had done 80 hours. Here we go. 80 hours a week, 5 days a week, and you take no holidays and no vacations. You barely double that because you didn't take any vacations. It doesn't change. So you have $30,160, which is just barely above the poverty line. But if you're a family of 4, you're not making any money at all. So the reason that I'm talking about this is because I am an example of someone who feels like they're going to drown in their student loan debt forever, may never pay it off, may never, find any relief, and just be making this monthly payment until I die is what it feels like. So let me give you a little backstory. When I was in high school, when I was in middle school, when I was in elementary school, performance is the only thing I wanted to do. You could not convince me otherwise. And our generation was absolutely encouraged to pursue careers that made us happy, that were fulfilling, to find something you loved to do because you'll never work a day in your life. Did somebody say that to you? That was said to me all the time. And I still don't disagree with that idea. However, the big problem though is that when you turn the thing that you are passionate about into your income, sometimes, and more often than not, you no longer become passionate about it because you are so focused on when you're getting the next gig, if you're putting things together, that you are so worried about the money aspect of your passion that it no longer becomes your passion. And then when you're asked, what do you like to do for fun? You don't have an answer. This happened to me all the time. I turned musical theater performance into my career, into my livelihood. And it was all I did. All I did was gig work and piecing things together nonstop all the time. So when people said, what do you do for fun? I was like, I guess I do theater. And they're like, well, that's what your job is. Yeah, no, that's my life. That's everything. So I didn't have anything that I did for fun. Whereas opposed to other people who have a normal job that is just a job. And they say, what do you do for fun? They might be like, oh, I perform at the local community theater, or I do karaoke on Friday nights, or I sing in a church choir. The performance, the art aspect isn't monetized, doesn't need to create revenue for them. And so they're able to just enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it. Now, I went off on a little bit of a tangent, so let's move on. So as we were going through looking for colleges and deciding what, as a generation, we wanted to do, the increase of college tuition was spiking. And it still is spiking. There's no end in sight. And we were just told, take out student loans. If you can't afford college, you'll pay it back. You'll absolutely pay it back. And we just were encouraged to do this. Nobody really thoroughly read the fine print. Even if you did read the fine print, it was worded in a way that was super confusing. And you're like, yeah, I have to pay it back. And you're just like, yeah, sure. Okay, I get it. But you didn't fully understand these interest rates. You didn't fully understand what a deferment was, what a forbearance was. You just knew you had to go to college, so you just went. I was so passionate about musical theater. I really believed that what I was going to do with my life was to move to New York after I got a degree and go to college, or go to New York and work on Broadway. That's what I really thought I was going to do. So I went to the best school that I found that I got into, and I took out an exorbitant amount of loans. My parents took out 2 years of loans. I took out 2 years of loans. So let's fast forward. College was the 4 best years of my life. And I want to be clear that at no point do I regret any point of those 4 years. I don't regret them. They created me. Those 4 years shaped me into who I am. But I should not be saddled with this lifelong chain of debt in order to have had that experience. Okay? So when I left college, I started traveling with a children's theater company. Wonderful, wonderful children's theater company. But because we were traveling, our salary was low. We got a weekly per diem, but our travel was paid for, our housing was paid for. We had no bills. I was making approximately $900 a month before taxes. So maybe a little less than that. And about 6 months out of college, out of graduation, my father called and said, hey, your payments are going to be due in like a month or two, and they're going to be about $800. I didn't have $800. There was no way I could do that. And at that time, everybody that was advising anyone was saying, well, you don't want to defer because the interest will just keep adding on. So you want to start paying them. Start paying them right away. If you defer, it's just going to build up, and you'll be in your 50s and 60s still paying them. So my dad did a forbearance, or not a forbearance, excuse me. My dad did a consolidation. He ended up consolidating with Wells Fargo. So my federal loans, most of them, there's still some left over, went to a private bank, which we found out later was an absolute death sentence in terms of student loans. So there I am, 22 years old, living on the road and giving most of my paycheck to Wells Fargo. And at that time, it was about $600 some. My consolidation had managed to bring it down from $800 to $600 some. And I was making that payment and barely surviving off of anything. And for years, I made that payment for years. Every so often, I would try to do a forbearance if I was having financial troubles. Times like that would be right around when we were getting married, when I was pregnant, when we were going to have low income or I needed some extra money. But private loans would only let you do 2 months of forbearance at one time. There was no year-long forbearance, nothing of the sort. And let's not forget that when you go on forbearance, the interest still accrues. So you stop paying and your balance goes up. So you're actually not saving any money. It just is a temporary pause and just adds on to the end. At the time, you were also not eligible to put your student loans into forbearance if you went back to school. Now, that did ultimately end up changing when I decided to go back to school to get my my music teacher certification. I came to a point in my career that I realized I was not moving to New York, and I was not moving to New York because who could afford to live in New York when $600 a month needed to go to Wells Fargo Bank? I couldn't do it, and my family was just never going to be in a position to help me with that, so that's where it was. So I came to the point where I decided, you know what, I do love teaching. I'm going to go get my teaching degree, and it was going to take me 18 months. So over the course of that 18 months, I was able to put my private student loan on forbearance, and I was going to not have to pay it. I understood that the interest was going to accrue. What I did not understand was that in the matter of 18 months, $8,000 was going to be added to the balance of my student loan debt. And I want to clarify for a moment why I decided to put those loans into forbearance. When I decided to go back to school, it was because the charter school I was at had told me that I had 6 months to get certified or I'd be fired. And if anybody knows, or lose my job, if anybody knows how music teacher certification works, that's just not possible to do it in 6 months. So I lost my job. I was just not renewed and I wasn't going to have work. So I was eligible for unemployment, but $500 some every month, I just couldn't afford to do that, especially when I was just going to be getting unemployment and we were living off of just my husband's salary. So it made sense at that time to do the forbearance, and we needed that little bit of reprieve to breathe. Reprieve to breathe. So I'd like to read to you an email that I sent to Wells Fargo when my loans came back due about my situation. I said, "Good afternoon. I received a comment from the Wells Fargo account on Instagram that I should email this address with my student loan concerns in response to my post." Obviously, like a good millennial would, I took to Instagram to complain about what I was seeing in the mail about my upcoming payment. I went on an in-school forbearance in July of 2017. I was fully aware interest would accrue as I have a solid grasp on how student loans, unfortunately, work. However, I was not aware that the amount that would accrue over 18 months would be $8,000, bringing my total balance to $2,000 more than my original loan balance was in 2011, which was a consolidation from a previous loan in 2008. So to catch you up to speed, we consolidated my original loan in late 2008. So I graduated in May, 6 months later, so November-ish, we consolidated in late 2008. And then in 2011, I consolidated again. And what happens when you consolidate, all the information from the previous loan disappears and you start fresh in 2011. Back to my email. It had taken me 8 years to pay from $75,000, which was the initial amount of my loan, down to $69,000. And now, because I had to go back to school in order to retain my job, I am back at the beginning, but even worse. And my interest was increased to 8%. A monthly payment of $651 is more than my mortgage, which is also through Wells Fargo. And this doesn't even take into account my federal loans that are still outstanding, totaling close to $350 a month. The only thing I want is my loan to be back to $69,000 and my interest rate dropped. This feels like a punishment for trying to get an education and better paying job. So I just want to clarify again. When I chose to go back to school, after 8 years of paying on my student loans at that point, I had managed to pay the principal from $75,000 down to $69,000, $6,000 over the course of 8 years. That's all I had managed to pay while paying monthly, with occasionally 2 months off for forbearance. So when I re-upped, my new balance was $77,000. So I just did the math the other day, because currently, here is where my student loan balance sits. Over the last, 2.5 years, at this point, when Wells Fargo would not do anything to help me, they said their hands were tied. And all I could do was maybe refinance, and they were going to force me to have a cosigner again, which would be my dad. They would not do anything. I decided to refinance at another private student loan in another bank. So this makes me nauseous. It should also be noted that in order for me to get that loan, my father had to co-sign for me because it was a really large amount. And the irony of the situation is that when I consolidated in 2008 and my dad co-signed for me, I was making $900 a month. And they gave me a loan for $75,000 at $900 a month income, not even salaried. So it was going to ebb and flow. So when I tried, if you come to me in the comments and say, oh, did you try SoFi? Did you try this? Did you try that? I'm telling you, I tried everything. And every single place told me that I could only do a 15-year loan because it was so big and I had to have a cosigner. Nothing gave me the option of not having a cosigner. And the irony is that when I finally was trying to refinance and get my dad off of there so that my dad was no longer saddled with my debt as well, they would not give me that loan, even though my credit was pretty good. It was around like the 700 mark. I mean, that's not amazing, but it's not awful. They would not give me the loan without a cosigner because of the amount of the loan. Never mind that I had bought 2 cars. Never mind that I owned my own house. Never mind that they gave me the loan. And this is the same bank that they gave me the loan when I was barely making any money. But now I'm making an actual salary of around $45,000 a year. Who cares? Like, whatever. That's around what I was making. And they wouldn't give it to me without my dad co-signing. So Citizens Bank is where we landed. My dad is still a co-signer. And when I have made 3 years of payments without any deferment or forbearance, I will be able to remove him. And I cannot wait for that day. The estimated, when I started this loan, in 2019, September of 2019, the initial amount was $78,354. So actually I was wrong. It wasn't $77,000. It was $78,000. Up to this point, now 2 years later, 2.5 years later, I have paid down and is now $72,000, $72,631. So about what? $4,000? Great. No, wait, that's $6,000, $6,000. I can't do math. Clearly, I'm not a mathematician. So in 2 years, I have managed to get this down because this interest rate is 5%. But I did the math. Over the course of 11 years that I have been paying, is it 11 years? Let's see, 2008? No, I'm sorry, 14 years. I have paid an average, I'm going to say about $500 because it started at $600, then at one point it went to $400, so $500 is around, just guesstimating. Every month, with the exception of a couple 2-month periods here and there, I paid approximately $500 every month for 14 years, which equals to $84,000 that I have already paid to banks. $84,000, which is more than what I initially even borrowed, which is more than my college education even cost. I have already paid for my college education, and I still owe a little over $72,000. I have about 17 years left on this loan, and fortunately, because the interest rate is lower than it had been, most of that payment per month, I pay about $500 some per month, is towards the principal. But can you imagine if somebody like me suddenly got $500 per month back in their paycheck that they do not have to spend anymore? Especially someone like me who has already spent so much money paying back who? The bank. Paying back the bank. What I have spent is $84,000. And where did that go? It just went to a bank. It just paid for somebody's boat, for somebody's house. That's not even what paid for my college tuition at this point. It's just all money that I'm just throwing down the drain. And this is why I am such an advocate for student loan forgiveness, because our generation was told that we had to go to college or bust. If you didn't go to college, there was no life and there was no future for you. You weren't going to be successful. Meanwhile, service jobs are at an alarmingly low rate of people who can do them. The mechanic up the street only has one person that works there that can work on cars. So it takes forever to get our car in because they don't have mechanics. Electricians are so expensive and hard to book because there are not a lot of electricians. There are not a lot of plumbers. Nobody in our generation was encouraged to go into these career paths because we were told that that was not the respectable path and that college was the respectable path. Taking out a ton of student loan debt was the respectable path and we would pay it back. But when we graduated, they lowered the starting salary for any good job so that it was not feasible to even make a living. And then they said, in order to get this job, you need to have a master's degree or 4 years of experience in an equivalent field. The bachelor's degrees that many of us even got were not even valuable anymore to even get a good paying job. And so you see tons of people in their 30s and late 20s who are still waitressing and doing gig work and side work and being scammed into joining multi-level marketing companies to make a little bit more money to help offset those bills, to help offset that student loan debt that some of them just can't ever get out from underneath. It is absolutely insane to me that any person should be paying as much as I have paid or anyone else has paid, and their balance is higher than when they started or barely even chipped away. It is absolutely the opposite of the American dream that we are in this position. Now, a lot of people who are not for student loan forgiveness, some of those people, one of the biggest arguments that we hear is, well, I paid down my student loans, so why shouldn't they? You should pay for what you borrow. I've paid it. I've paid $84,000 of it. And that mentality of, well, if I paid it down, then you should also have to pay it down. Well, you know what? My grandmother died from ovarian cancer. And even though there's been science happening, I want them to stop doing that, because if my grandmother died from ovarian cancer, then so should your grandmother. Why should we find a cure for diseases because somebody died from it? You know what? I don't want you to have to do that. I've been in a car accident, so we should stop trying to stop all car accidents because, I had to deal with it. So you should also have to deal with it. Just because you were in a position to pay off your debt, congratulations. Good for you. I'm so happy that you were able to find a job, have any kind of privilege that probably helped you. I would argue that anybody that did that did not have a family member that helped them or some sort of privilege that helped get them where they needed to be, there's not very many people who paid it off entirely on their own. I mean, I have no actual statistics on that. That's just me hypothesizing or whatever word we want to use. But the mentality of, well, I paid it off, so why should everybody else get it forgiven, is toxic, and it's, what about me? I had to deal it, so you deal with it too. No. Why is that the kind of mentality that anybody would have? Just because you dealt with something terrible means that you should say, I don't want this to have to happen for the future generations. It's the same idea of if a parent says, well, I had to deal with, freezing cold temperatures in school, so should my kids. No, we look at the things we dealt with as children, as young adults, and we acknowledge, like, this sucked. This was not okay. So we are going to strive to make things better so that our children don't have to suffer what we suffered. Because they're going to suffer other things that we did not have to deal with. So why should we expect them to also suffer our sufferings? So we work to make things better. And again, I don't know the logistics of what student loan forgiveness would really do. But I know that there are people in politics in Washington that do have a solid plan and that shows where it's paid for. And when you look at people who are billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, and I think to myself, it would be a drop in the bucket for them to pay off my student debt or many people's student debt. It would be like giving me $75, except it's 75,000. The way that the government, instead of pouring their money into the frivolous things, and when they say, oh, we raised millions of dollars for this campaign. Did you? So you were able to find millions of dollars for this campaign, but you can't find millions of dollars to forgive our student loan debt? I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I understand the nuances and the nitty-gritty of politics. I don't. But what I do know is that Americans are hurting, and the biggest scam outside of multi-level marketing companies is student loan debt, and we have to do something about it. I hope you all have a great day, and thanks so much for being here.